Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome back to our class on Islamic banking and finance. So today we will discuss about Islamic leasing and hire purchase facility of or we call it Ijarah, that sometimes used for car financing. So not necessarily car financing using this kind of contract. It can be another form of contract, like for example murabaha or diminished musharaka, right? So as you know, in the previous class we already discussed about the sources of fund in Islamic banking and finance, which we are discussing several contracts that used by Islamic banking and finance and financial institutions, such as murabaha, such as tawarruk, what else, bal'ina, and so on, right? So today our discussion will be around ijarah and another and several types of ijarah. So in general, ijarah itself we will divide it into two, right? There is ijarah and there is Ijarah at-tasghiliyah, right? What we call it operating lease, and second type is Ijarah at-tamliyah or financial lease. So these two type Ijarah, difference, there is a difference in terms of the purpose of having this kind of contract, right? So we are having two ijarah here. Ijarah, right? First is ijarah at-tashghiliyah, operating lease. Right? Ijarah at-tashghiliyah. This is the first type. And second type is financial lease, right? Or we call it an ijarah at-tamwiliyah, or some people, they are dividing into three. There is a financial lease, which is used by financial leasing company, or there is al-ijarah al-bankiyah, a banking banking lease, right? But actually these are the same. Ijarah bankiyah, right? This in banking or Islamic banking leasing, right? These two types of ijarah, the main objective of having this kind of contract is to own, right? Because the bank or a financial leasing company, they don't have intention to own that kind of assets. While in this type of ijarah or operating lease, the main purpose of having this kind of contract is to benefit from that kind of asset, or to get the usufruct of that kind of asset, right? So this type of ijarah in banking and financial institutions, or it is from the leasing company, right? So our discussion will be covering first is ijarah contract. The second is ijarah based vehicle financing, which sometimes they are using ijarah thumma al-bay', means the leasing on the end of the tenure of the contract, or at the end of the maturity, the customer will buy the asset, right? The third one is financial lease, alright. The fourth one, what is the Islamic perspective on financial lease? And the last is some application of Ijarah-based financing, whether it is direct leasings, or it is sale and lease back, or it is decreasing sale and joint lease, right? So we will discuss one by one what does it mean, right? So first of all, before we are going into detail about the practical implementations of Ijarah contract, so we have to understand what does it mean by Ijarah contract. Alright, Ijarah means, a lessor or mu'jir lease the property to the lessee. Right, the property is any kind of asset that having its own usufruct. Right, in the exchange for lease or rental payment. So if you want to use this kind of asset, you have to pay a rental. Right. You have to pay a rental, either it is daily basis, or it is a weekly basis, or it is monthly basis. It can be also quarterly basis. It can be semi-annual basis, or it can be annual basis. So depends on the agreement of both mu'jir or mustajir, or between the lessor and the lessee. Right. So the definition of Ijarah contract itself. It is a type of hire, lease or rent, also regarded or sell or usufruct of bel manfaat. So some people saying that it is bel manfaat. Some saying this it is ijaratul manfaat, right? Buying the usufruct, or rent the usufruct. So the own of it means is to own the usufruct, or it is to benefit from that usufruct. Right? So there is a question. So what is the difference between Ijarah and sale? Right? So there are some kind of differences in terms of how we differentiate between Ijarah and sale. The first one is the ownership. Right? If we are compare the Ijarah, right, and the sale, right? Here, for example, this is sale, this is Ijarah, right? We can differentiate. It is first, right? Is ownership, right? Ownership, right? In sale, the ownership will be transferred between the seller to the buyer, right? This is in terms of ownership. While in Ijarah, there is no transfer of ownership of the asset. In SL, there is a transfer ownership of the asset, while in Ijarah, there is a transfer of usufruct only, not the asset. Because the assets will remain owned by the mu'ajir, or the lessor. Right? While in the sale, the ownership will transfer from the seller to the buyer. Right? So the lessee only benefit from the usufruct or the use of that kind of the asset. Right? So you have to understand these two differences. Right? Now, in terms of risk and liabilities. Right? In terms of risk and liabilities, when the transfer ownership has been done, right? When the contract has been concluded, right? So in the sale, the risk and liability is transferred to the buyer, while the risk and liabilities on Ijarah transfer to the lessor, right? Say for example, the maintenance of the building, for example, if it is a building rental, it is still the landlord is liable to do the maintenance, except it is because of the fault of the tenant, right? So the second is in terms of risk and liabilities, right? So we already understand two differences. And second one on bilateral contract. So both are, this is bilateral contract, right? So the third one. So if it is bilateral contract, it is also a bilateral contract, right? The fourth, what about the period, purpose, and mode of use, right? Period, right, and purpose and mode of use, right? Now the period. Normally, both are having the same period. Again, it depends on the agreements of the between, if it is on the sale between the buyer and the seller. If it is rental, it depends on the agreement between the lessor and the lessee, right? But normally, because the rental or ijarah, there is the precision of the asset is depending on the assets, right? For example, if it is car, it is mostly is between 5 to 10 years. It depends on the country to the country. It depends on the jurisdiction and jurisdictions. All right. Some country they allow the bank to finance. The car up to 10 years, right? But there is a country they are only allowed 5 years. There is country they are allowed only 7 years. And other than that, it is also depending on the type of the car itself. The more demand of the car, the higher the appreciation, the value can be made, right? So, for example, if you are compared between the Japanese car to and the German car, normally the Japanese car, the rental period can be higher compared to the German cars, right? For example, German car maximum is 5 years. If the Toyota, it can be 7 years to 10 years, right? Because the demand of the car itself is higher compared to the German car, right? Okay. And second is the purpose. The purpose of sale is to own, but in the purpose in ijarah is to benefit from the assets, while in the mode of what the usage is said, right, is it's to benefit from the user from, right? Right. And the fifth one, the difference is the payment or commands upon delivery of assets. Well, in the sale, normally you pay in the full if it is cash, or if it is financing from the bank or a leasing company. You can pay on installment basis from the price, right? Right, payment, right? It is payment. Well, in ijarah, normally you are right. You are only paying the rental. Means during this kind of financing period, what you pay is a rental, but in the sale contract, what you pay is the price of the sale. Right? This is the fifth type of differences between sale and ijarah. Right? Now, so another differences is, for example, if you compare to sale and ijarah. For example, if you put a timeline here, for example, this is, for example, 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, for example. No, in the sale contract, right? If you fail, to pay on the fifth years, if the financing tenor is 10 years, you fail to pay on the 5th years, right? So you are still on the asset, right? Although it is not fully owned because you are not fully paid the asset, but in the rental, if you are failed to pay on the 5th year, you are not on the asset, because this asset not belong to you. It is belong to the lessor, not belong to the lessee, right? So the advantage of sale, if you are failing to pay on the 5th year, you still on the asset, right? But still negotiation on that. But on the on the Ijarah contract, you are not own the asset because you are only rent the asset. Alright? Say for example, the same thing like when you rent, for example, like us, we are renting the house or apartment here in Oman. We are not owning the asset. If we are, for example, if we want to leave the country, we just leave because we have no shares ownership of the assets, or we don't have any objections to the assets, right? So this is the type, the differences between the sell and Ijarah. And the last things, in order to differentiate between sell and Ijarah, is the all type of not all things can be rented, right? But most of the things can be sold, right? Can be sold, right? Say for example, building, it can be sold, it can be it can be sold to anyone, right? But and also, but it can be rented also to anyone. But a difference if it is the food, right? The food, you can sell it the food, but you can rent it. You cannot rent the food because the things that diminishing in terms of usage, or something is finished in one go. For example, in the food, it cannot be rented, right? Okay, these 6 differentiation between sell and Ijarah, and maybe 7 in terms of here is ownership, right? It can be also fall in the first type of differences. I hope that will be clear, right? So our next discussion is what is itam? Al-Ijarah thumma al-bay'. So al-Ijarah thumma al-bay', or rent, at the end of the day you will buy or you will purchase the asset. It is a financing which involves 2 contracts. For example, it is Ijarah, a buy contract, to be executed separately or in sequence, right? So you have 2 contracts here. There is a lease contract, there is purchase contract, right? But these 2 contracts, it should be executed separately. It should be concluded separately, not in one time. All right. So the first time when you are doing the contract, banks and the customer will sign, all right, agreement, a rent contract or lease contract, Ijarah contract, right? But there is no sale contract in the beginning, because sale contract will be conducted or concluded at the end of the period. So if the customer fell in the middle of tenor, the buyer contract will not be executed, and unless except the customer want and has money to purchase on the mid of the period, right? So under the Ijarah contract, the customer hires the goods from the finance company or the bank at an agreed rental over a specific period. For example, if it is 5 years, it is 5 years rental contract. If it is 10 years, it is 10 years rental contract. So you can expire of the hiring period, and the hire enters into al-bay', a contract. So when it is, say for example, like our example is 10 years, for example, if it is leasing of 10 years, right? So in that after 10 years, and the banks will sell its assets, or the leasing company will sell its asset to its customer, right? But it should be at the end of the period. If it is not end of the period, the bank will not sell it, because the promise of the bank, he will sell the underlying assets if the customer fulfill the whole Ijarah contract period, right? So now we will discuss about the modus operandi of an ITAB and in between Islamic Bank its customer, right? Say for example, this is, let's say, with let's say it is a customer, let's say Marwa, right? And this is, for example, it is Islamic Bank, right? Say for example, in order to do this contract, normally Marwa will identify the assets. This is the first type. For example, the car of Mercedes, right? Right? So the Mercedes type of, for example, the GLS 500, the new model, right? The price of this Mercedes 500, for example, is around 50,000, right? Oman Riyal. So Marwa will identify the asset that he wants to rent it out, right? Then Marwa will approach the Islamic Bank in order to do the Ijarah thumma al-bay' contract, right? This is the second type, right? So what is the bank will do is then bank, right, will purchase the Mercedes from the Mercedes showroom company, right? MST. So he will purchase, right, Mercedes from the showroom company, right? Okay. Right. Here, not purchase. Sorry. This is the what is practice here. The bank will identify and check with the Mercedes showroom company that this customer already approached us that he wants to purchase Mercedes. After getting confirmations from the Mercedes showroom company, what the bank will do, he will sign Ijarah contract. Now the signing agreement here is the bank and customer will sign several contracts. First is Ijarah contract. Means Marwa will promise to lease this kind of asset, which is Mercedes GLS 500 with the bank. And second, what he will do, right? This 3, 4, right? This A. The B, what he will do, he promise. Bank will give you a promise to sell at the end of period. Promise to sell, right? At the end of the period, he will promise you that the bank will sell the underlying asset at the specific price, right? On the C. At the end of the period, you and the bank will sign a purchase agreement. PA, purchase agreement, right? So after you sign you are having all this kind of contract, so the bank, what the bank will do is the bank will purchase, right, this purchase this asset, this 4th, the 5th, right? Or the bank will appoint you or Marwa to do, as a bank's wakil to do the process of sale, but the sale is coming from the bank. The buy and purchase between the bank and the Mercedes showroom company, right? So here. Bank will purchase the underlying assets, right? After the ownership has been done, all right. After the Mercedes has been purchased between from the Mercedes showroom company to the bank, then the bank will lease the asset. Here, lease on the 6th, right? So after leasing, then friend, they will conclude, they will conduct the purchase agreement at the end of the period. This is the way how the Islamic banks and customers, they are doing the Ijarah modus operandi. Right? I hope that is clear. If you have any questions, you can ask in the YouTube links, or you can ask on the WhatsApp group. Right. Now, after having this kind of discussions, how the banks are conducting or concluding the Ijarah formal bay agreement or practice, there are some kind of the issues, of course, that will be happen during the contract. First is the issue of late payment charges, right? So we have a lot of issues that happen during the implementations. The customers and many scholars or academia from the university asking, in this of Ijarah, you are not allowed to charge late payment charges, because if you are doing this one, this is kind of riba, right? Or we call it under riba al-jahilah. So I give in extensions, but you have to pay. But it is already clear that from the AOF Sharia standard and the majority of international Sharia scholars saying that it is allowed the bank charge late payment with the conditions that this late payment charge it should be channeled into the charity account. So it is cannot be treated as the income of the Islamic bank, right? So it is now clear. So this kind of some kind of punishment of those customers who are not disciplined in terms of paying the rental, right? Now the second issue is that the maintenance. So who will bear the maintenance cost, right? Because many people are questioning, because the banks is on the rent, the rental assets. So the bank should take the maintenance cost. Yes, as for the AOF Sharia standard, the banks, should responsible to do all the maintenance costs during the rental period, right? So if the customers who are doing the maintenance cost, it should be deducted from the rental monthly rental that he is paying to the Islamic bank, right? But if it is the cost of because of usage the customer, it is because of, for example, customers not really care about the building. For example, if it is building for the rental, so the bank will not obliged to pay the maintenance cost, right? Right. The third is for example is deposit paid by scam, because there is a practice that has been done by the Islamic bank, where Islamic bank is obliged the customer to pay deposit, for example, during the rental period. So this deposit paid by the customer, if it is a part of the purchasing of the assets, it should be if it is considered as hamish jiddiya, so the customer cannot take the deposit until the end of the rental period. If it is considered as down payment, so it should be part of the purchase of the underlying assets. Alright. Fourth point is the floating rate in Ijarah Thumal Bay, because in this Ijarah contract, Islamic bank can increase the rental on annual basis, or it is on 6 months basis, depending on the and the market at the time of conditions. So in terms of Sharia, there is no issue of increasing the rental rent. So what the bank should do is that he has to agree with the customer in showing what is the conditions or what is the market condition at the time. Right? It is unlike the sale contract, which is you cannot increase the price, while in Ijarah, in type based contract, alright, you can increase the rental because rental is flexible. Now, the next point is that the combination of contract in this Ijarah Formal Bay, because there is at least two in Ijarah Formal Bay. It is Ijarah and it is a purchase contract. So in Islam, from the Sharia point of view, it is not allowed to combine more than one contract, right? So in order to eliminate this kind of fiqh and Sharia issues, the bank should have two separate contract, which is not one contract is not related to each other, or one contract is not affect in each other, right? So I think most Islamic bank has been done this kind of separations where the contract is on having its own uniqueness. Ijarah is the Ijarah and sell is the sell, right? So the next is default and delinquencies. Alright. So what if the customer default? Right. So if we are talking from the Ijarah point of view, if the customer default, for example, if the financing in 10 years, right? Say for example, if this financing is 10 years, right? He default on the 5th years, right? The financing tenure is 10 years, right? The default in 5th years. Now, as per the fixed point of view, the bank is fully on the assets, right? But it is allowed for the bank, for example, asking the customer, you can sell the assets. The price of this asset, I will take some kind of, for example, 70% I will take it, but 30% of the sale, price, you can take it as the fee or under Ju'ala contract, right? So I hope that is clear, right? So the bank in this case will delinquent some part of its sale price to the customer, right? So there is a questions coming here. So what if the customer is not the end user of the assets? Means he wants to lease the asset from the bank, then he will lease back to the third party. For example, if it is car, also can be leased to someone else. If it is property, it can be rented out to somebody else. So from the Sharia point of view, actually it is not allowed, but it is allowed as with the condition that it is allowed by the lender or the owner of the assets, right? And then, so the securitization process, right? If you are aware what is the securitizations, it is, for example, because in the banks, for example, right, there is asset, there is a liability. Here we have assets, here we have liability, right? In the asset side, there is a Ijarah based contract of financing, right? Ijarah based IBF, Ijarah based financing. There is SL based financing. So, what if the bank take this kind of Ijarah based financing to doing securitization by selling this some kind of portfolio to somebody else by issuing, for example, Sukuk based Ijarah contract? Of course, it is allowed because the bank is on the asset side. So the bank will sell the assets, while the buyer of this securitization paper will receive the rental from the customer, right? So the usage of the term, usage of terms. For example, it is allowed for the bank to say that if it is property, if you are not allowed to do non-Sharia compliance in activities inside of this property. If it is car, you are not allowed, for example, leasing it to somebody else. Or maybe the bank will say you are not allowed to use the car for prohibited activities from the Sharia point of view. It is allowed. Right. So the last point is that this in early settlement. Right. As we know, it is because it is kind of Ijarah contract. If it is 10 years, you have to finish the 10 years contract. Alright, then you can conclude the purchase contract at the end of period. Let's say, for example, the customer has money on the 5th year, right? Here, for example, the customer have the money on the 5th year. So can we use the early settlement basis like in the conventional? But here we are not saying is early settlement. We are saying this to buying the asset at early period, not on the 5th, but not on the 10th, sorry, but in the 5th years. Now the bank can negotiate. The customer can negotiate with the bank to have the purchase price of this kind of the asset. Normally, there is some kind of calculations, and the bank and customer can agree on that, right? So this is, I think, at least 10 issues here from the fiqh point of view. All right. So I think you can have a clear picture now how the Ijarah thumma al-bay' is implemented in Islamic banking and finance. Right. Now, what is financial lease? Because we in the beginning we are discussing about the operating lease and financial lease. As we know, financial lease is normally done by financial leasing company, or in a banking lease. It is also done by Islamic banking institutions or entities, right? And the operating lease is not done by financial institution. It is not done by banking, Islamic banking, but on the operating lease, it is only done by the leasing company. Normally, like in Oman, we have in a Al Habib in a property, for example, or in any kind of if it is car, for example, there is a toll company renting out in a car, either from Mazda brand or other kind of brand. So or it can be a Bahwan car leasing companies, or it can be some other companies, right? So in the financial lease, the application of Ijarah is mode financing extends beyond vehicle financings. Alright, so it is the objective of it is to own the assets. Business often require financing to purchase machinery. Alright, normal this kind of financial lease is to purchase the machinery, equipment, or other fixed asset, and even land and buildings. Right? To address this, then Islamic financial institutions have resorted to a type of Ijarah contract which is loosely comparable to conventional financial lease. Right? Although this is comparable to banking conventional financial, but it is a difference one another because in Ijarah contract has its own uniqueness. Like what we discussed about the fixed issues related, at least 10 points. Which Ijarah thumma al-bay' uniqueness in terms of the implementation. The term of Ijarah wal iqtina, Ijarah muntahi bil tamliq, or Ijarah thumma al-bay' have been used interchangeably. So many financial institutions already use this one, and that they are using Ijarah muntahi bil tamliq, and that they are using Ijarah wal iqtina, they are using Ijarah thumma al-bay'. So both these three types of contract, it is Ijarah, but at the end of periods you can purchase the property, or at the end of the periods you can own the asset by way of hibah, right? Alright. The basic idea is for the bank to finance the purchase of an asset via leasing arrangement and at the end of the lease period, ownership of the asset is transferred to the customers, right? So in conventional leasing, there are two types of lease: operating lease and financial lease. That we already discussed, which mostly something to do with the ownership itself. One ownership is transferred to another, or another type of there is no transfer of ownership, and also it is reflecting the risks and liabilities in terms of the both types of contract. The key features of a financial lease period equals to the expected useful of life of the assets, right? If it is, as I told you, if it is property, it can be 10 years, it can be 15 years, but if it is car, it cannot be more than 10 years. Mostly, the Islamic bank cannot give you more than 10 years is maximum, but it is normally required the higher demand of the brand's car. For example, like Toyota or what else, or Daihatsu, for example. That's a higher demand on it, right? The acquisition of the lease asset is part of the leasing arrangement. That is, the bank lessor would not purchase the asset without first securing the lease contract and with the lessee. So before the bank execute the Ijarah contract, normally bank asking the customer, you have to promise us that you will lease the asset, right? So total lease payment equal to the cost of the asset plus the bank's profit margin, which reflects to its opportunity cost of funds, typically market interest rate. So many people still questioning why the bank, Islamic bank, they are reflecting the profit and the cost with interest rate. So because this, we have to compete with the conventional bank, right? You cannot put a higher rate in Islamic bank while the customer are seeing another market is lower. At least we have to compete with the conventional bank. So all risk and liability associated with the asset ownership are transferred to the lessee. Alright. So in this case, in the financial lease, when you are lease the asset, for example, in this car, when there is an accident, you have to responsible for that because you use it, right? This type of risk, you can transfer it to the in Islam and Takaful company or Islam insurance company by paying some kind of premiums on that. So in the effect of financial lease is simply an interest-bearing loan. So why would business lease instead of borrowing? So that's why, as I told you, people still questioning the financial lease, like the or Islamic banks in Ijarah. Best contract is the same like interest bank. Of course, it is not the same because the Ijarah contract in Islamic bank has its own uniqueness, right? Compared to the interest-bearing loan, right? So when there is a question, so why would business lease instead of borrowing? The motive is purely of tax and accounting purposes, where in certain circumstances it is advantageous to lease instead of borrow. So if you are in some jurisdiction, if you are purchasing the asset, you have to pay some kind of tax, right? But if you are only borrow, you are not obliged to pay some kind of tax, right? So this is the reason behind of it. So the leasing can result in business of paying less tax. Leasing can sometimes be used to window dress accounting figures and ratios, giving the impressions that the business is less leveraged. So if you are rents the assets, it means you are less leveraged. It means you are not much borrowing from other parties, right? So now there is a question: what is the Islamic perspective on financial lease? Because we have discussed the type of Ijarah into two, operating lease into the financial lease. So a key character of lease is predetermined and fixed income or return in the form of lease rental payments. So the lease normally is predetermined and fixed income and return. So one could, how is different from the interest-bearing loan? Conceptually, difference is with riba-based loan. Money is treated as the commodity, whereas the leasing or Ijarah, the user of the tangible property is the commodity of the object of the sale. So this is differences. So in interest-bearing loan, you are treating money as a commodity, while in a Ijarah-based contract, you are treating the assets or property or car, or we call it the underlying asset, as the as a commodity. So we cannot put the money as commodity, but whereas there is no usufruct on the numbers, but in the property there is usufruct. Means other people can benefit from that kind of property. So more importantly with Ijarah, although the rental payments are fixed, return to the lessor is not, right? So for example, there is a market risk, there is operational, and the market is a true leasing business. There's acquired the lease asset prior to to secure any leasing contract. Thus, the lease asset is subject to price risk, the risk that the lessor is not able to profit the lease or the assets. If, for example, if it is property, normally, of course, it is normally the price of the asset will be increased. But what about it is machinery, it is the car, normally the price is decreased. Right? There is a market risk there. There is operational risk also. Maintenance cost, for example, can sometimes exceed the rental income. The resulting is lost to the lessor. So it is for the reason undertaking of risk which constitutes iwad that Islam has permitted Ijarah and prohibited riba. Right? Hence, from the Sharia perspective on critical factor in determining the permissiveness of any Ijarah contract arrangement is whether the lessor actually bear the risk expected a true lessor ownership and maintenance cost. That is, there is an element of iwad in Ijarah contract. So we have discussing the iwad concept. So in Ijarah contract, of course, there are element of iwad. Like for example, the banks is bear all kind of risk in the underlying asset or property of this car, and there is effort also to find the good assets, and people want to rent it out. There is liability as well. So all these kind of elements of are available in the Ijarah contract. And the Sharia only recognize operational lease, not financial lease, as intimate by conventional manner as valid form of Ijarah contract. In other words, financially as practice conventional are in substance nothing other than interest-based loan. Any attempt to structure Ijarah instrument and to this effect is merely means circumventing the provision of riba and tenure. This is some kind of arguments coming from the side, or we can say it's critics as to the conventionalists. So that's why we are changing with the Ijarah-based contract, which has its own uniqueness, right? So there are some applications of Ijarah-based financing. A number of applications of financing with a contract of Ijarah are being practiced. These essentially are leasing contract at the end with the lessee owning the assets. For example, is direct leasing or Ijarah al-Mubashir. Ijarah al-Mubashir, there is sell and lease back al-bay' wa 'iyadatul ta'jir, okay, or al-bay' wa 'iyadatul isti'jar. Decreasing sell and joint lease by تدريجي والاختصاص الشريك بالإجارة and forward lease إجارة موصوفة في الذمة. So this kind of type of Ijarah that use practiced by Islamic banks, but many Islamic banks they are using the Ijarah موصوفة في الذمة or إجارة ثم البيع. Alright, this is Ijarah muntahi bil-tamlik. So these three types of Ijarah that used by Islamic bank. So the three types of Ijarah that used by Islamic bank, it is forward lease or Ijarah mawsufa fi zimma, or Ijarah muntahi lease with the end of the ownership, means at the end of the periods the bank will give hiba to the customer, or Ijarah thumma al-bay', Ijarah, but at the end of the period the customer will purchase the underlying assets. So the direct leasings is let's say for example, if the customer wants to rent the airline, for example. We have the case in Oman where the bank are leasing the airplane, to its customer. So the bank normally getting approached by its customer to lease the assets, right? And then the bank will approach the airline, developer, right, or airline company. So the bank will purchase the airlines, and then before that, normally the airline, for example, there is a airline company like for example Oman Air, right? He will rent out for example the Airbus product, right? So the bank normally will purchase from the Airbus, for example, right? So we delete this one as the example. This is the sample of their listing, but it is the product is very rare used by Islamic bank. Normally it is for big contract only, right? So we change here. Let's say, for example, it is the sample of Oman Air, right? Oman Air. Say for example, and this is Airbus company, right? Say for example, the bank will be approached by Oman Air, right, to rent the Airbus, an aeroplane, right? And then they will have some kind of agreement here, right? Which means, for example, like agreement of Ijarah and a promise to lease, right? After having this one, the bank will purchase the aeroplane from the Airbus, right? Then the bank after purchase the airplane, when the airplane transferred and forward, right? The bank will lease the airplane to the customer. Then Oman Air will pay. Right? On the 5th, pay rental. Either it is on monthly basis or it's make annual or quarterly basis, right? So this is a sample of direct leasing, where the bank right, where the bank purchased the aeroplane directly from the Airbus in order to rent it out to the Oman Air, for example. All right. So there is a sell and lease bank, right? الإجارة وإعادة التأجير أو الإجارة وإعادة الاستئجار. This some kind of, for example, if the we will having use the same between, for example, if it is, all right, if it is Oman Air, all right. So let's say okay, let's say Oman Air need cash for its business operations, right? What the Oman Air do? He will sell some kind of asset. For example, one of the aeroplane, right? One of the aeroplane, for example, there is a Airbus, right? I don't know, A330, for example. This, for example, right? What he will do? He will sell his Airbus, right, to the Islamic bank, right? Then Islamic bank will give the proceed of the Airbus price. For example, the Airbus price is 5 million Omani Riyal, right? This is a sell price. After having transfer ownership between from Oman Air to Islamic Bank, then Islamic Bank will lease, alright, the asset, the aeroplane, to the Oman Air at the agreed period, right? So here normally Oman Air and the Islamic Bank will have an Ijarah agreement. This is for Ijarah agreement, and second is promise to lease. Promise to lease. So, right? So this kind of Ijarah and sell and lease back. So in this case, what is the benefit of having this kind of contract? Oman Air will receive cash of 5 million in order to do some kind of this his operations expenses, while the bank can benefit from the lease of the assets, which it can use be as capital expenditures of the Oman Air, right? Now, there is questions. Let's say, is it possible that manufacturing company obtains liquidity using his own assets? For example, Airbus company, is he able to get financing by selling his own aeroplane aeroplane to have some kind of liquidity? Of course, yes, because the first requirement of having this kind of contract is you have to own the asset, then you can get the liquidity, right? There is al-Ijarah al-Muntahiyah bin Tamliq, right? This kind of leasing, but the ownership of the bank will diminish at the end of the period, right? So, another type of is forward lease, means you are renting out something which is available in the future. Let's say, for example, you want to rent out the building to your tenant, but the building is still under construction. You are allowed, right, to do such a kind of transactions, whereby the customer pay the rental upfront, right? For example, 2 years, while in the construction finish after 2 years, the customer can enjoy the another 2 years of usufruct with without paying anything, because the customer already paid on the beginning, right? And to make it easy, I give you in the right in the timeline basis, right? Let's say here -2 0 2, right? Say for example, this is the construction period, CP, right? Construction period. Here during the construction period, for example, this is the customer pay rental. If the customer already pay rental or the tenant already pay rental, on the next 2 years, he can benefit usufruct without paying the rental, because the tenant already pay on the beginning, right? So this is allowed by minority of the Hanbali schools, point of view. Why it is used by the Islamic Bank? Because it is the need of the customer and the needs of the market. We don't have this kind of a contract. It is difficult to the Islamic Bank to do some kind of financing, but the asset is still under construction. Right? It can be used to structure the financing of an asset under the construction. In the effect of an asset under construction in lease, with the lease obligation beginning upon the completion of the asset. Use an alternative to istisna, right? this kind of alternative to istisna, because in istisna we are this is sell and purchase agreement by purchasing on the futures kind of asset, right? An example of it can be suku al-intifa or Islamic in Islamic security, financing the construction of Zamzam Tower in Mecca. This using also al-ijarah يعني الموصوفة في الذمة, right? So how we will do the al-ijarah موصوفة في الذمة? So we already having this kind of user from. Let's say for example the tenant, right? This is Islamic Bank. This is Zamzam Tower, for example, Zamzam Tower, right? So the tenant will approach the Islamic Bank, right, to do this kind of ijarah musuh agreement. So the bank, right, will deal with developer, right, to who is developing the Zamzam Tower, right? For example, if it is 2 years, he will purchase his the bank will give upfront payment here to the developer. For example, if it is 2 million Omani Riyal, for example, and then the tenant will start paying the rental. After Zamzam Tower finished, the customer will benefit from the Zamzam Tower user fraud. So this is type of sukuk intifa, al-ijarah mawsuf al-zimma, which are using the sukuk al-intifa. So in the sukuk al-intifa, what we are having, this is the SPV between the tenant and the investor. But it is this kind of example of Zamzam Tower without the sukuk intifa. But if you wants to structure this kind of ijarah mawsufa bizimma based on sukuk investor, what you are dealing is between the investor sukuk holders and SPV, right? So the developer will do ijarah contract to use the land with the landowner. You can see on the slides that I shared with you. And the second is you because you have the right to because you already the developer already agreed with the landowner. Now the developer will list the right of future of use units on the chosen time slots. For example, future list to the sukuk investors, right? What after that, the payment for lease rental, then the developer will issue the sukuk al-intifa to the sukuk investors, alright, by having the sukuk certificates. Then the developer will transfer the proceeds from the sukuk lease to the commercial hotel and complex by developing this kind of Zamzam Tower. So this is kind of the structure that used in sukuk and al-intifa, right? So I think this all our class for today. We already discussed about the sukuk in ijarah mawsufa bizimma. We already discussed ijarah tamwiliya, or we call it financial lease. We already discussed about ijarah bankiya, or financial lease that implemented by Islamic banking and financial institution companies. Or we already discussed about the operating lease, which is a simple ijarah that's normally implemented by leasing companies, like car leasing companies. Like here in Oman we have Tawal, or a property we have Al-Habib, and so on and so forth. So this end of our class on ijarah base contract. Inshallah, next class we will discuss on home financing. this home financing, mostly we stress on the use of al-musharaka al-mutanakisa. So inshallah, next we will discuss in detail how this musharaka al-mutanakisa implemented in the normal life and in financial institution. Hope you enjoy the class. Inshallah, see you soon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.